Welcome to the Fellowship Podcast, a place where we have gospel conversations about loving God and transforming lives by following Jesus through life-on-life relationships. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to the Fellowship Podcast. I'm here with Eric Perucca, one of our elders of our church, and attended fellowship in the first church service. We were just talking about that. Yes. And man, it's been, 22 years?
Yeah, so I think it was back in 2000, 2003, 2002?
2002, 2003, I think is when it was, and started in Rocking Horse Academy, and we've come a long way since then. I wasn't even there at that first service, and so...
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I know that Rebecca and I got married in 2001. We lived in a back house in San Leanna and Man Shack and for a year, and then we decided we were going to move and we were going to buy a house, and so we came out to Plum Creek. And I think the craziest thing is we're building a house on the corner, and every time we show up to look at our house being built, this guy just kind of pop out of the bushes, and his name was Marty Mosier, and he's like, "Hey, you got a church to go to?" And so anyway, he lived a couple of houses down from us, and then I think they finished building our house. We moved in, and we attended the very first service that they had in Rocking Horse, and it was, it was a small. Now, I'm not going to say it was, tiny. There was quite a few people there, but very intimate. It's changed quite a bit.
Yeah, I went from Rocking Horse to Negley for 6 years. That's when I joined on a year into that, setting up, tearing down like crazy, and then built this building, which I don't know if people know that, but you actually were the construction guy on this building.
Yeah.
One of your first dives into construction.
Well, I was doing residential work, and I remember when this all came about, we had planned for quite some time, and I was on that, kind of involved in that planning and trying to get the right people, and we hired a GC, and that didn't work out, and of course, he sued us, and it was a terrible thing that was bad. But then hired these other guys to come in, and they had left out, I don't know, $160,000 worth of stuff we needed. And so they had asked me if I would build a church, and I said no, because I go to church here. And didn't want to run that. But
and you still go to church here.
I still
so
go
we
to
did
church
okay.
Here. Yeah. So it worked out all right. But I knew that I'd have people come up and say, "You need to do this and you need to do that," and I'm like, well, But anyway, they decided, because I was superintending it, I was just kind of managing what was happening every day, that these guys said, if we step down, y'all save $60,000 in paying us, and you can just continue to pay Eric and he can build it. And so we were able to make back, come in under budget.
Yeah, amazing.
Which was awesome. It's amazing. And here we are.
Yeah, that was the Lord. Did so many crazy things during that. I remember us jackhammering down in the hole, trying to put one of these light things in there, and just, it was an adventure. I think I have fond memories of it. I'm sure that every day was crazy.
Yeah. So we all took a turn jackhammering, and then when Jonathan got in there, he jackhammered the cord in half.
Yes, he did. I remember
jackhammering was over for
like
the
that
day.
Was all over at that point. Like, come on, Pastor.
Yeah.
But a lot of fun adventures. But I think we actually met through FCA maybe for the first time.
Yes, you were one of my sponsors. I took care of Hayes High School. You were, I would say, when doing the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, we were always, ministering to coaches and athletes. And when I would go in to find a coach or minister to a coach, sometimes those coaches, they'd be really, wet behind the ears, and you couldn't get them to, they didn't know what to do. And so you really kind of held their hand for some time, which was fine. That's what we were there for. But you weren't that guy. I remember getting a phone call saying, "Hey, you need to go meet with this guy, Chris. He's been a youth pastor. He's, And so one of my, stories that something always sticks with me in my mind is your nanklet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you used to wear it around. I was like, dude, what is that?
Right around the calf, yeah.
It was a knee anklet's what you called it, a nanklet. And when I asked you, you used that as an opportunity to talk about Christ. And I was like, it's different. Kids like it, but that opportunity is very important because as soon as a kid asks you, don't stop talking.
Right. It's like there's an Under Armour that God has for us. It's totally different than the world's. And so,
Stop talking. So, I met you. I don't know what year it was, but it was probably around 2005 or 6, something like that. 2004 or 5.
You didn't have the beard back then?
No.
You're pretty shaven
slick.
back then, slick and young. We're both young and didn't know a whole lot at that point. But tell us a little bit about your story, because one of the things that I've had a blessing to know you for quite a while and get to be in the truck in Honduras and hang out at Mauricio's house and crazy stories of Honduras. But a lot of people don't know how you came to the Lord, and that they're just you probably shouldn't be sitting here today. God was very faithful in bringing you to the Lord and giving you an incredible family. So tell us a little bit about that story.
So, as a kid, I grew up in a small little place called Wickett, Texas. This place didn't have any law. It was a place where, the derelict kind of came to hide away so that they didn't get caught. And my parents had a house there, and my grandparents, my dad's parents, had a house there. And then my mom's parents lived 7 miles away in Monahans. And so our family was kind of all from there, and we lived there. But it was a pretty, crazy. I think about my childhood of things we would do. It was a different time. Your kids could kind of go and play and do stuff. But where I was at, there was a lot of criminals and different things. I saw stuff, at the age of 5 and 6 that I don't think grown men have ever seen. But it was a time in our life. My dad worked in the oil field. My mom worked in the oil field, and they ended up getting jobs in Andrews. My grandmother and my grandfather on my dad's side lived directly behind us, basically. So if you could look out our kitchen window, and you would look across this parking lot that was the city pool, and then a main highway, and you could see my grandparents' house. And I spent a lot of my time at my granddad's, doing stuff with him. But that place, I picked up a lot of stuff. I learned a lot, before I was 8 years old that I would say most kids wouldn't and see. And it was just the environment that it was around us. I had good parents, they loved us and took care of us. And I'm not going to say that their standard was the highest standard, but I would say that more than anything, I never went without feeling like my parents didn't care about me. They loved us. And but as we grew, I got older, my dad and mom got a job in Andrews, Texas, and that was an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes away, and they drove there every morning.
Wow.
For almost 2 years, I think, because there was no housing. And so, when we finally got there, we got there and we were in a neighborhood that, you just got a house, and it wasn't terrible, but I would say I grew up learning how to fight and fighting, because that's, you had to take care of yourself.
That was the seed that was kind of planted with that atmosphere around you. There was a lot of criminals and just a lot of, you better be tough or else you're going to get.
Yes. And that's what I saw, and so what's crazy is you kind of develop this idea of an image that that you have to kind of have in order to survive around people. There's a lot of tough talking, and I found out in life along the way that there's a lot of people that have that image but really can't back that image up. And so there's a lot of fakeness out there. But as I was growing up, I knew, I knew how to fight, and I was a fighter. So was my sister. She's 2 years older than me, and she was probably, my hardest, opponent. But she, we grew up in a small town in Andrews. It was good. It was an old town, tough town.
Did that fighting help you in football? So I know you were a pretty good athlete, and
So, as you grow, like I was saying, I was a white kid in a neighborhood, and I wasn't the fastest, so you had to learn to fight and those kind of things. But some of my friends through, growing up, really, they kind of pull you in a direction, and they were great athletes and the people around you, but it was always something that was in my heart, and I always wanted to be. My dad pushed. My dad was a good athlete, and so when I, got into Andrews, they had sports that I didn't have out in Wickett, and so I started playing, and just became tagged as a good athlete. And then so when I got out of high school, I was a kicker and played defensive tackle, and so my goal was to go play football somewhere as a linebacker or something like that, and kicking got me in. And so what was crazy is my dad, they lined us all up one day and said, whoever kicks the ball the farthest in middle school is the kicker. And I kicked it the farthest. And so he said, well, if you're going to do this, then we're going to learn to do it right. So he put me in some pro kicking camps, and I learned, and I think I still have the school record at 57 yards.
Nice.
To win homecoming.
That's more than me. So that's weird for people to think about. We have such similarities a lot of times in life.
Yeah.
Like I was a punter and kicker in college as well. And we lined up in junior high, and we had a punt, pass, and kick. Yeah. So I turned out to be the kicker and the quarterback because I could throw it the furthest and I could kick it the furthest. Yeah. And that's kind of how you did it back in the day. Yeah. Even when I coached, there's times where I was like, okay, guys, line up. Who could throw it and work it out?
So anyway.
So that's when you got to Tech for kicking.
Well, no, I went to Eastern New Mexico first. I was recruited out of Tech, but my grades, I was probably not the best student. And so I went to Eastern New Mexico my first semester and then transferred into Tech. That was my, it was one of the passions I had wanted to do. And I look back on it now and think, just like you talked about the other day, how wonderful it is that God took that away from me. Mm-hmm. I got hurt, and I was going to come back, and all of these things, and I went into. What's funny is I wouldn't drink or do anything like that because I was an athlete, and I mean, it was honest. I never did it.
Yeah.
I was around it a lot. Lots of people that did it. Was always in my life, but I remember I wasn't playing anymore, and really I kind of just dropped out of life because that was the only goal I ever had, was to be a pro. And I had a chance. I remember going to kicking camps and them telling me that if I could kick for a couple of years in college and my numbers were good, then they could get me in. And so I was really hype about that and thought that was the goal. And when that all kind of goes away, your mind, you kind of shift to a place of like, what's my worth or what's my value?
Yeah.
And so it just all kind of changed. And I remember I turned 21 and I didn't drink or anything. And I was at some friend's house, some really close friends. And I remember they were drinking and I weren't, and they're like, hey, dude, you're 21. You could drink. And, I thought, yeah, I could. And so I drank 4 8-ounce Coors Lights and got trashed. And I would say that was the beginning of the downfall. I started drinking, started doing drugs, became a drug addict. I was on steroids, thought I was going to come back. I had all these things, these demons in my life that, no direction, and ended up, fighting on the streets for money, so that I could pay for my drug habit,
Wow.
those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And, in doing so, bad things happen. I remember getting into a fight and almost killing a man. And I was sitting in jail. And I asked him, what are you going to charge me with? And it was, he was in a coma and they didn't think he was going to come out. And they kept telling me attempted murder. And I was like, I didn't know back then much of anything other than I was thinking I don't want to spend the rest of my life in prison. But through some time I spent in there, the guy, thank the Lord, he woke up and it went to aggravated assault, and then they said, well, he only used his hands, and so it went to assault. And so, there's life-changing events that are in your life, I won't tell you that changed me to love Jesus. It just changed me to be more cautious on how I, was deceitful and
it was a step maybe in like
right.
the recklessness and the self-destructive nature, because there's going to be a time you might fight someone who was better than you, right? And you hadn't met that person yet, but especially nowadays, I hear stories about people that they train UFC and they might look like the most mild-mannered guy and
they are not
break you in no time. And so it was one of those steps, and God does that a lot of times where it's like a little step here, little step there, until he really gets you to that point where, okay, I'm ready to give my life.
And that's a key part of who I was is I had a lot of anger. And that anger, in fact, I blacked out that I don't remember a lot of what happened, and I used to remember saying, great fighters aren't people that are skilled. It's people that don't care what happens to them. They're going to get to you, and when they do, that's the deal. And not caring what happens, but just anger and those kind of things that trap you, that's where you get. And, the fear was never a factor. I know that, later in life, after the Lord changed my life, the greatest fear is that I put myself in a situation that I would go back there. That was my greatest fear. And so it was a change. But as I went on, I was in and out of jail all the time, still doing drugs, selling drugs, and doing things that wasn't honoring to the Lord. And I remember I graduated from college, which was a miracle. I took off a year, went out pipelining and making money. And, I looked out and saw these guys. One guy had a hook for a hand. The other guy had an actual peg leg. One guy was missing an eye, and the other one was dragging his leg. And I got to looking around. I thought, I don't want to end up like these guys. And so it was payday. And I got down and got my paycheck, told my boss that I'm going back to school. And, I'd negated anything I had at Tech. And so, I entered back into school. I drove all night, got back there, and the last day to register for classes. And, I had money. I'd been making money, working 7 days a week. And so started back up classes at Tech and just continued the life, but just went in and got a degree, got a coaching and special ed degree with a minor in English. And so when I graduated, I moved here to Austin and started working with a buddy of mine. We partnered up to do tile, was making tons of money, making tons of money, still living crazy. Chris, on any given day or night, if we went out, I would get in a fight. It was just the nature of who I was. And that
was kind of your default, right?
Yeah.
Just like, okay.
Run from the cops. I'd fight the cops. I fought 7 cops when I was in Lubbock. And, by God's grace, they didn't charge me with assaulting an officer. They just took out their frustrations on me, and they liked it. So, but in the end, as I started moving this direction, I was still doing all those things. And you know what? I had a friend when I was in Lubbock. He had lived in Europe, and I worked at the Children's Home of Lubbock at one point, taking care of kids, foster kids, in a therapeutic group home. And I'd say that's probably some part of what, my deal was always that I couldn't stand anybody that preyed on the weak. And so always growing up, I was always beating up weaker people than me, but I was always beating up somebody that was picking on, a special needs kid or somebody that had problems or those kind of things, and I didn't like it. And so when I was there, this guy, he was talking to me about Europe and backpacking across Europe and doing all this stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, one day I'm going to do that. We fast forward, I graduated from Tech on December the 15th, and I think the 17th I had everything I owned in Austin. Mm-hmm. I got out of West Texas and started working, doing all those things, and I'd amassed a whole bunch of money. I worked 7 days a week, sun up till sundown, setting tile. We were getting paid so much. It was during the boom. And so I decided I'm going to take a couple of weeks off and go to Europe. So I took more than a couple, I think. I took a couple months and went to Europe and backpacked across Europe. And during that time, I was in Europe. I flew into Amsterdam, tried ever smoke shop they had. And it's important that I preface that because of what's going to take place. And going through went through Germany, Hungary, Czech Republic, into Italy, all the way over to Greece, back to Italy, Austria, into Nice, France, back over to Spain, into Spain, ran with the bulls, came back out of Spain, went to France, and then I ended back up in Amsterdam again. Well, when I was in Rome, there was something significant that happened. I was, you go and you see some of the greatest architectural things that you ever see. It's amazing what you see over there, but there was a painting, and it was of Jesus. And Jesus, had his shroud on. He was standing up. There was 2 steps, and there was a lady sitting like on the bottom step. He's standing on the top step, and her hand is up in his hand, and she's looking up at him with this look of hope. And he's looking out. He's not looking at her, but he's looking out, and he's looking out, and he has a look of, of concern, desperation. And I remember standing there looking at that picture. My grandmother, who was a saint, my dad's mom, and my mom's mom, they were both godly women. She would pray for me all the time. She'd take me to church. I grew up understanding, knowing who Jesus was, but I didn't really know him,
Yeah.
And so I understand what was happening in that picture. And I remember standing there looking at it. You know how when you're in front of a picture, the eyes look at you, and no matter where you go, they're looking at you. And all of a sudden I had this feeling, and I said, he's not happy with what he sees. And then this voice came over me, and he's looking at me, and he's not happy what he sees. And it came over and said, he's looking in you, and he's not happy with what he sees. And so all of that, it was like in a moment, but there was something that just changed my thought and feeling. And I couldn't explain it. I can now, but I couldn't explain it then.
Okay.
And so I started traveling, and from that point forward, I had no desire. It was crazy. I didn't have a desire to do any drugs or anything. I was trying to figure out some emotion and something. My mom got really sick. My mom, as you know, her vocal cords are paralyzed. She has 1 lung. She's a first lady who survived bulbar polio. And so she had gotten pneumonia in Wichita Falls. And my dad called me and said, Eric, you need to get here as fast as you can. I don't think she's going to make it. And I told Dad, I said, where I'm at, I can't get there fast. It's going to take me a while, but I'll try. And so I ended up, trying to make my way back to get to see Mom, and then talk to him. And he said, she's out of it. She's okay. And so I just kept the course of what I had there. But in my mind, I was going to stay in Europe. I wasn't going to come home. I was going to stay there. I was going to work. I was just going to kind of, be a vagabond or something, just live life as
free. I mean, like you're kind of free, do whatever you want to do.
Really run. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Run from everything that you know that is nothing that you have.
Yeah, it's true. Because when you do slow down and people really know you, not just the exterior, but get to know the soul, that's what you're worried about. The painting kind of sparked that thing of like,
when that painting changed everything, as I got back to Amsterdam, I'm here in this place, and I spent a whole week, and I didn't participate in anything. It was very weird for me, because, as I said, as you grow up, you begin to create this image of yourself that everybody else creates too. And so my image was that guy that if there was ever trouble, you go get him and he'll take care of the trouble. If you needed this or that, you go to him and him. And so you have this image that you're trying to uphold. And for some reason, we cherish that because people want or need us in a sense. And so you kind of like that. And so this image that I had, I really didn't want it anymore, didn't feel it kind of deal. And so anyway, I remember getting on the plane, flying back, coming back into Austin, and my mom called me as soon as I got in, and she's like, "Hey, why don't you come out here? We haven't seen you in a while, and come stay with us for, a couple of weeks, and let us, spend some time with you." And so I said, "Okay, I'll do that." And so I drove back to Andrews, and during that time, spending with my parents is when the Lord changed my life forever. And so if we go back to when I was in the 8th grade, 12 years prior to this, there was a man named Ross Hartsfield who was the music minister at the Baptist church. I was in the 8th grade, and he knocked on my door one day, and my dad answered it, and everybody knew who Ross was. And he said, "Can I talk to Eric?" And so my dad just like, yeah, turns around, walks, sits back down, and Eric, somebody's at the door for you. And so, so I go to the door, step outside, shut the door. We're standing in the entryway, and Ross is there. And he said, "Eric, I wanted to let you know that every night I get on my knees to pray, for whatever reason, God puts you on my heart. And God has a purpose and a plan for your life. I just don't know what it is." And that was his message. And I can tell you, as an 8th grader, I was already, I was as tough as any man. That I was just tough. And in my mind, I thought, "You pedophile, if you touch me, I'll roll you up." And that was the message he told me. And he's like, I just need to tell you that. And he got in his car and he left. In my mind, I'm like, "You weirdo." And I go back in the house, did nothing for me. About 2 weeks later, he knocked again. I answered the door, and he said, "Eric, I need to talk to you again." I was like, "All right." So I go out, and he's like, "Come sit in the car with me." And I was thinking, dude, this is not going to. He had this old Galaxy gold car, smelt old. And anyway, we get in there, and he was, I could tell that Ross was really convicted about it. But, as an 8th grader, I was like, this guy's weird. His car smells. But he gave me the same message. He said, I get on my knees at night and pray, Eric. God puts you on my heart, and I don't know why, but God has a purpose and a plan for your life. I just don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. I get out of his car, shut the door. Ross drives off. It's night, and I'm just kind of standing there like, okay, this guy's weird. Go back in my house, and that's it. Nothing more with Ross. No more conversations with Ross, anything like that. And then I get back. I come back to my parents. I'm at my parents. I'm trying to figure out life. Really, this whole confusion thing, I had life figured out before, knew exactly what I wanted, but I was just looking at my life going, drugs and jail, and I hurt people, and cared nothing about, women, their feelings, or men, and the destruction that I'd created in my whole life. I mean, didn't know. I was like, where am I going? What am I doing?
Right.
And I was sitting on the porch at 3:00 in the morning, smoking a cigarette at my parents' house. I smoked. And all of a sudden I was looking up at the stars, and I said, God, if you're real, if you're truly real, and you made the heavens, and you made that tree, and I don't know how you made that tree. You made my eye. I don't even know how it works. Surely you can change my life. And at that moment, Ross Hartsfield's voice came into my head, and he said, God has a purpose and a plan for your life, Eric. I just don't know what it is. And I said, Lord, this cannot be your purpose, and this cannot be your plan. And he revealed to me who I was and what I had done to him. But immediately after that, he revealed to me what he had done for me. And I fell on my face, and I wept my way to Jesus that night. And my life had changed. And it hadn't completely changed, but it had changed. I was totally different. I had the things that I desired, I no longer desired. And the things that I didn't desire, now I started desiring. And so how I knew my life had changed, I began to pray. There was two things. I began to pray for a woman. And no lie, this is exactly what I thought. Lord, bring me a ball and chain. And that's what I thought. A woman that is going to keep me out of the bars, that's going to keep me straight, going to keep me. And, I'm thinking I need that because I know who I am, somebody that's going to hold me accountable. Well, I've been praying for that. And about 2 weeks after I was praying for that, I found myself in one of the same places I'd always found myself. It was just a way of life. I was in a body shop of a buddy's. They were having a keg party. And I was in there and I was shooting pool. Wasn't drinking. That just wasn't doing that. But I was, it was the people that I knew. I didn't know any. I didn't know any good people. I just knew the bad people or what they were living in that sin as well. And I remember these two guys were about to get into a fight, and I was shooting pool, and that was, my thing. And I was watching them, and as I'm watching them, I see somebody out of the corner of my eye. You just develop an instinct to realize who's around you and what's going on. And out of the corner of my eye, I see this guy sneaking around, and I'm like, he's trying to sneak this guy. And so I just kind of walk over and I step in front of him. I said, it's none of your business. And this is the moment that I knew that my life had changed. And I told him it's none of your business. And he bowed up to me and I said, you need to walk off because I'm going to count to 3. And if you don't walk off, I'm going to knock you out. And I said, 1, 2, 3. And I hit that guy. He spun around, hit his face on the pool table, and he was laying flat on his back on the floor, bleeding profusely out of his face and his nose. And I remember I'd never felt like I'd felt at that moment. And I wanted to get down there, pick that man up and hold him in my arms and tell him I was sorry. And I left there at that moment, and I've never gone back. And I've never hit a man in anger. Unfortunately, I had to hit a man in Honduras one time because he was going to kill a lady. But that was the only time since then I've hit a man out of anger in a fight or anything like that. I'll punch you in the arm, joking around, but not serious. But
you had regret this time.
It was anguish. I was I was ashamed. I felt bad for him. I felt remorse. I'd never felt any of that.
Yeah. It's got to change your heart.
Yeah. In the past, I would have kept going. And I remember after that, I left there and I was like, Lord, never, in that sense. And I said, well, I got to get a Bible. I got to get a Bible and I got to get my head in the Bible so I can figure this thing out because I don't know. I knew a little bit, but not a lot.
Yeah.
And so.
Is that when like soup and those sort of things happened because you started reading the Bible and then you were like, okay, I need to get some discipleship and get involved in that?
So, no, but I'll tell you, I started reading the Bible, I started moving that direction, and then I met my wife. So that person that I'd been praying for, I met. And I can remember how you think of a ball and chain, or you think of somebody that's going to hold you accountable, that I met Rebecca. And it all gets crazy. It gets really crazy how God works and what he does. And I met her, and I remember I'd stayed there for like 3 or 4 months instead of whatever. I didn't have anything to go to. I didn't go back to the tile business because I knew that's where all the drugs and, all that kind of stuff was. I wanted to separate myself from all that. So didn't go back into that or do that. But anyway, I went over one night. My mom volunteered me, to put a desk together for Rebecca's mom. And so I went over there and was putting that desk together, and that's the first night I met her. And I didn't even think anything about her. She was a 19-year-old girl and, giddy. And, I didn't think anything about it. I was 26, I was 27 at the time. And anyway, through time, she was studying for anatomy and physiology, and she was struggling with it, and happened to be one of my classes that I was really good at. And so I was like, hey, I'll give you some help. And anyway, kind of sparked up a relationship, and before you knew it, 3 months had gone by, and And I remember the first night I told her that I loved her. I said, Rebecca, I want to tell you that I love you. And, of course, I was thinking she's like, I love you. You're the best thing in the world. But she didn't do that. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, Eric, I'll never marry a man until I know he's the spiritual leader of my household. And I was like,
what does that even mean? Right.
Well, that's a ball and chain right there.
Yeah.
So I started working as hard as I could to be the spiritual leader of Rebecca's household. And somewhere along the way, she fell out of the picture, and I was just trying to be a spiritual leader for God. And things just started to change. I started to live. And so I told her, I said, okay, I've got to go back to Austin, and I'm going to get a job. I'm going to, start working again and try to get a life started up so that we can have a future. Well, I get back to Austin. I'm living with my cousins, and I asked my cousin Dan, I said, hey, man, I got to find a church. I need a church. And he's like, there's a big one right down the road from here. And he said, it's Great Hills Baptist Church. Why don't you go down there? And I thought, a big one? Of course, I had long hair down to here, and I still look like a biker. I had a beard, but it wasn't like this one. But anyway, I was like, yeah, big church. Nobody will know me. I'll just kind of blend in. So I get to this church, and I'm walking in this church, and I thought, I'm not sitting on the back row. I'm going to the front row. I'm going to hear what he has to say. I want to know. There was a desire in me that I'd never had.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what happened to me inside of me, it didn't change who Eric was. It's just like Paul. I just switched teams.
Yeah.
So I was still this guy that was insanely intense, but I was just playing for the right team now.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about that when we would go to Honduras and would think, well, if we need someone to be, I remember one of our first trips when the guy with the machete came out, and all of a sudden you and I are up front and everybody else is behind us. And we're like, okay, if this goes bad, Austin, I think it was Austin Pennington, that Austin, you take everybody to Israel's house. We'll take care of the machete guy and whatever. It's like, if I needed something, I'd run to you, go, hey, help, there's a fight coming.
Right.
You're one of my draft picks. So he doesn't change. He changes the reason we are the way we are.
Right.
Right. Gives us a new focus in there.
It wasn't the desire that I wanted to take credit for. It was the desire of protection. And more than anything, not only him, but the people that were with us.
Yeah.
It's different how you look at it. But so I ended up coming back. I was going into the church, and I said, I'm going to the front row. And as I'm walking the front row, I'm looking down, trying not to make eye contact. Don't want to really talk to anybody. I just want to kind of get in and get out. And I'm just walking, and I see these shoes walking up in front of me. And so I go to look up to kind of get out of the way. It's Ross Hartsfield.
Whoa, that's crazy.
And I go, Ross. And he looked up, and I go, what are you doing here? And Ross goes, Eric, what are you doing here? And it was the most insane thing that I'd ever experienced. And this is the man's voice that God used in my head 12 years prior to me coming to the Lord.
Yeah, praise the Lord. That's so cool.
And then I looked at him, and he spent the next 2.5 years discipling me.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
And so in that process of Ross discipling me, Rebecca and I got married, and Ross married us. I worked as a coach. I got a job at Westlake High School as a coach and a special ed teacher. And I did that for a very short time because I had this guy named Cody Carlson. And if people don't know who Cody Carlson is, he's this awesome individual. I love Cody. He's one of my great friends. He played quarterback for the Houston Oilers. Very humble, amazing man. And he got a knee injury, and he'd come walking down the track, and I'd see him from a distance with that old crooked knee bending to come ask me if I would be the FCA sponsor. And so I became the FCA sponsor at Westlake, started doing FCA there. And then he kept asking me if I'd go to this leadership camp. And I didn't want to go to a leadership camp. I didn't have, And one day saw him walking up the track, and I just yelled out before he got to me. I was like, "Okay, I'll go. Leave me alone." He came over there, and we got a bunch of kids from Westlake to go to that leadership camp there in Hardin Simmons.
Mm-hmm.
And I went down there, and it changed my life. I poured into kids, and I spent time with kids, and it was the desire of my heart to tell people about what Christ had done in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I went down there and saw 500 kids with their hands raised in the air, praising God, and I said, that's what it's about.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. And so I quit my job before I had a job and went to FCA and said, God's called me to work here at FCA. And my boss at the time said, well, we just hired a guy. We really don't have the funds raised for that. And I said, well, I know God's called me here. And he said, well, where God guides, he provides. Mm-hmm. And so Cody helped raise funds. They started raising funds. And during the summer, I was working for free for them, doing stuff, going to camps, doing those things with them. And then came around and I got a job and started taking care of South Central Texas for FCA. Mm-hmm. And that's where we met. And so I did that for 9 years in full-time ministry. And the Lord changed my life, and that was the direction I went. And me and my wife got married, and, we
started having kiddos.
Had 6 kids. And I remember we had Hank Roy, and Roy is Rebecca's dad's name, and he died when she was 15. He was a nurse practitioner. He's the first nurse practitioner, I think, in Texas. And anyway, he died of a massive heart attack when she was 15. And so Hank was born, and I had some issues and some trouble at FCA with my boss at the time. And there was some sinful things in his life that I brought to light, and I wanted to, more than anything, kind of reconcile that and get it right. And it turned in a direction that it shouldn't have. And he was born, and the next day I remember I got fired over an email. And to be honest with you, I think it was the biggest relief that I'd ever felt, that I was no longer under, that leadership. And I knew that what I was doing was right according to what God had told me to do. And so I wasn't worried at all. My wife was totally worried. She was so worried. What are we going to do? What are you going to do? And we were living in Plum Creek in that house down from Marty. And I remember, we already had 3 kids. She's worried, what are you going to do? And so I just started doing kind of handyman work, taking people's trash out, whatever I needed to. And I got this really big job offer from some pro coaches had put this ministry together. Dempsey from, the Lions. I mean, these guys were really passionate about young men that didn't have fathers. And so they were looking for someone to run that ministry in Texas, direct that. And my name got to them somehow, and started talking to them and thought, this is it. This is what, the Lord is doing. He's shifting and moving me into that direction. And so I was praying. I was like, Lord, just if this is the job, just give me the go ahead. Yeah. And I remember I had a call. It was coming up, and I knew they were going to offer me the job. And I was sitting in my office, which was the Forerunner, outside, because I had a bunch of kids and I didn't have an office or anything. And I remember getting on the phone, and before that I was praying, I was like, Lord, and as I got on the phone, this feeling came over me, and I'd asked the Lord to reveal that something, if this is the job he wanted, but he didn't. Mm-hmm. And I was like, Lord, and he said, I didn't reveal anything to you.
Yeah.
And so I remember these guys, and I said, before we started, I said, I'm truly grateful, but before you go any further, I would like to say, I can't tell you enough how honored I am and that if you were going to offer me the job or whatever, but I'm going to have to respectfully decline it. And so he said, why? And I said, and this all just came to me in that moment. And I said, because I know that this job requires that I travel a lot and I'm away a lot. And I said, what kind of father would I be? I have 5 children, 4 children, 1 on the way. What kind of father would I be if I was away trying to protect the fatherless and not being a father for my children? And I just hope that y'all understand. And I remember that call was over and I got out of the Forerunner. And once again, I felt this peace about, it's awesome.
That's amazing. I mean,
I have no job.
Yeah,
awesome.
When you don't think about it, right? Because you think, I'm going to do this incredible ministry, but so many times we sacrifice our own families for that. Even when I got out of coaching, that was one of the main things I had was Shelby was 12, and I went back and looked at the hours that I spent in football, and I was like, I've missed 3 years of her life.
Yeah.
Because of the amount of time you spend from 2-a-days to there and just gone from her house. Like, do I want to be that kind of dad?
Yeah.
Or do I want to have a relationship with her and my other 3 kids? And I made that decision when Jonathan asked me to give that up to come do ministry here. It's like, okay, it has to do with being a father. It's a great responsibility. Excuse me.
And so, let's say through that process, when I was at FCA, one of the questions you asked me earlier was about Soup and those guys. And so, at FCA, I met a guy at leadership camp. His name was Ken and Vaughn, a dynamic individual. One of my mentors, and just a guy that he was amazing. Photographic memory, just amazing guy. And he was starting, I'd met him a couple years before this, and he was starting a ministry called Downline Ministries. But that ministry that he was starting was kind of like Tom Nelson's Young Guns. You were really involved. You were there early in the morning, and we were going through the Bible, verse by verse, and we were learning from some of the best teachers in the world, some of the utmost known teachers of certain books of the Bible that they spent their life doing. And so we're learning all this kind of stuff. But part of the deal was you had to go to Memphis, Tennessee and live there to do it. And I'm like, I can't do that. I got, a family and everything, and I just couldn't do it. So I approached him and said, hey man, what about doing a, kind of like a Zoom at the time, but for guys like me that can't make it there, and try to videotape and have these sessions and all these teaching sessions and then upload them to us, and we're watching them. We're behind you a day, but we're watching everything that happens, and we're going through and being able to do that, and we're communicating with him, and he's like, yeah, let me try that. And sure enough, he did it. And so I went through the first one that they had. It was a 10-month program called Downline Ministries, and one of the guys that was in that teaching was Roy Campbell, that everybody calls Roy Soup Campbell.
It's a sick nickname. No lie. Your name's Soup. I mean, Soup. That just sounds cool.
I know, but Campbell.
I know.
Campbell Soup, but everybody called him Soup. Anyway, and Herb Hodges, and they taught discipleship. That was their key, is discipleship. And so part of the program of the 10 months is that you had to go on a short-term mission trip and teach discipleship and teach what true discipleship is. And so I'd, gone through the program, and I was slated to go to El Salvador. And we were leaving in a couple of months. And then all of a sudden I get a phone call and say the trip to El Salvador has been canceled, but a trip to Honduras, you're going to be going into Honduras. And his question was, which I found, I think about it now, I know why, but he said, hey, let me ask you something. If you go, can you survive anywhere? Like if you get dropped in somewhere, can you survive? And I'm like, yeah, I can survive anywhere. And he's like, good, because this place we're going into is pretty remote, and we need some people that are going to go in deep, and we think you would be good for that. Well, I was the only Texan going, and I think there was 37 of us at the time, and the rest of them were from Memphis, Tennessee. And one of the guys that was with us, and of course I didn't know it at the time who he was Lecrae. And everybody knows who Lecrae is. And I remember getting there, and Boyd was a guy, he was a Marine, and spent a lot of time, and it was Boyd and I were taking us and 6 other guys, there was 8 of us, into the valley, way down
there.
Yeah, in El Plan. And so I remember going there to learn, we're going to teach them what true discipleship looks like. And what I learned is God revealed a whole lot of things to me. It was probably the most profound moment that I'd ever had in my life at that time, up to that point, is I went in to El Plan. I went and I met Soup Campbell, and this guy is dynamic. So Kennan was discipled by Soup. Soup was an inner city gang guy who the Lord had changed his life. He was hard. I love that man. He was hard. Mm-hmm. But Kennan was directly under him, and he'd go to his house, and he would go at 5 a.m. and beat on the door. And finally, Soup come to the door, and he's like, "I want you to disciple me." And he'd say no and shut the door on him. And Kennan kept coming back and kept coming back. And so Soup said, "Okay, I'll disciple you. You're going to be here at this time. You're going to do this, what I say, or this, or you're out." Mm-hmm. And Kennan did it. But Soup tells the story of, I don't waste my time. It says faithful men. It doesn't say just men. It says faithful men. Yeah. And so he said, I had to make sure you were faithful. And him and Herb Hodges discipled Kennan. And then I was, under Kennan, a lot of teachings of Kennan, and I've listened to a lot of people that discipled. Kennan went through Tom Nelson's Young Guns. I mean, Kennan was just this guy is just dynamic. Kennan has a mark on his life from God that I could say that he's half Jewish. His dad was Jewish, and he's blessed. Yeah. And he was the one in Gonzales that was in the plane crash. They crashed a plane, and Kennan was the only survivor in this plane crash. And he was going up to Gonzales. One of his church members, he's a pastor there, and one of the church members had a saddle shop and stuff, and they were going up there to kind of take a retreat and check on it, and something happened, and that plane went down, and there was 4 other guys in there with him, and they all lost their lives, and Kennan survived. And so I've always known that God's purpose for Kennan's life, because he's so dynamic, is there. And I'm there in Honduras, and Kennan isn't there, but Soup is taking us in. And I remember packing in, getting down to the place. It was crazy. You drive, I flew in on the craziest thing that you'd ever do into Tegucigalpa. It was the most dangerous airport at the time. Now it's the second most dangerous because they took out half of the hill. But you would come in a commercial airplane, jet, and they would bank it off of that mountain and like the wing on the ground and turn and then just slam it down. And I remember flying in there, and this guy sitting next to me is from Waco, Texas, and he lived there now. He retired there, and he talked like this. And I remember going, "Oh man, what's going on?" He goes, "Hang on, brother." And I looked down and saw the wing, and he slammed it down, and everybody go, "Woo!" Cheered. And as we're landing, I'm looking, and there's crashed planes still out on this. And
that's why we don't fly in there anymore.
And I was like, what in the world have I gotten myself into? Anyway, I make it in. Rick Beck is a missionary that's there. He picks me up at the airport. He was late. My plane was late because it got hung up in Houston. We were on the tarmac for like 2.5, 3 hours. So by the time he got me, I missed pairing up with the group. We drove till 4 a.m. and finally got to Llorito.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And met up with Soup. We went into what they called a hotel, which was
not a hotel like we think of it.
It's like bathrooms. Yep. Not maintained bathrooms. But I remember going, okay, no, I'm not going in there and sleep. It was pretty nasty. It was the first time I'd ever been out of the country like that. I mean, I'd been to Europe and I'd stayed in places, but nothing. I think Czech Republic had some places like that, but nothing like this. And so I remember sleeping in this Isuzu in that little bitty chair, just going to sleep. And I woke up that next morning, and I look up, and there's a guy walking down the street towards me with a machete. And I was like, what? And he just walks past me, and I come to find out a machete's like, a pocket knife. That's just something everybody carries.
Everybody's got one.
Everybody's got one. They cut the grass with it. They do everything with it. And I remember.
Now, what year was that? Was that 2005
or 6? Okay. Somewhere in there, 4 or 5 or 6.
Because we went together in 2009.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So somewhere in there, 2005-ish, 2006. It's been so long, I'd have to look it up. Yeah. But and I remember getting out, and that's when this guy goes, "Hey, have you met Lecrae?" And I remember going, "Hey, Lecrae, good to meet you." And
just going on about.
Yeah. But he was such an amazing teacher as well. He was an amazing teacher of discipleship. And so they took these 37 men and women that went, and they split them up into all these groups and sent them into different villages to teach discipleship. And Soup and his wife and a couple others, they would start in a village, and then they would ride during the time we were there to the next village, and they would bring generators, gasoline, and this big sheet, and we would show the Jesus movie to him. And he was doing that and going through. And so it was amazing. Well, I met a guy named Hector, and something about this guy was different, and it changed my perspective on things. I'd gone in there to teach discipleship, and we did. We taught what true discipleship was. We loved on those people. But this guy, Hector, there was something about him, how he loved his kids, kissed on his kids, hugged his kids, smiled. He had joy. Mm-hmm. And I can't say that I can say that no other Honduran was like him, except Israel. But Israel didn't live there in El Plum, and he just had love. And I remember we were having a church service, and it was a Wednesday night. We're on this porch, and there was only like 10 people there. And Hector got up, and they asked him to give his testimony, and his testimony blew me away. And it was something that was there. And he was talking about they were riding home, and it was dark. It was getting dark, it was dusk. And all of a sudden, this guy rides up and pulls a gun out to rob him. And Hector had a gun. And Hector said he pulled his gun out and shot, as he was pulling it out, he shot, and the guy realized he had a gun, turned, and he shot at the guy. And he missed, but at the end of it, he turned, and his brother was sitting on the horse, and he had shot his brother in the stomach. And his brother fell off the horse to the ground, and he said, he looked up at me and said, "You've killed me." And Hector said, "No, I haven't killed you." And he got down and got over his brother, and he said, "'Cause I believe in Jesus, and I haven't killed you." And he would listen. He had a little radio. The power of this, he had a little radio. And that little radio, every night before he'd go to bed, he'd turn it on to go to sleep. He slept on a dirt floor, and he'd turn it on to go to sleep. And the only radio station he could get was a Christian radio station. Mm-hmm. And he listened to this Christian radio station. And as he'd given his testimony, talking about how Jesus changed his life, and he believed in Jesus, and he wouldn't die because of the power of Jesus, his brother got up, pulled his shirt up, and it looked like somebody had given him surgery with a hacksaw. But they went in, at this, you know where it's at.
Yeah.
It is nowhere, man.
It's remote.
There's nothing. You get nothing. And that guy was standing in front of me, and Hector was smiling ear to ear, and I was just blown away. That testimony really...
He survived, and he was...
It just is amazing. Just Hector himself and what he said, and the belief and the faith and everything. And I remember sitting on that porch, and they started praying, and they were singing, and I was praying, and all of a sudden God the Holy Spirit came over me, gave me this vision, and I didn't know any of it, nothing about any of this. It was all foreign to me as, and I saw myself in this vision. I had an orange shirt on and a red backpack, and I was hiking back into El Plum. And he revealed to me that's where I needed to be. And so Hector and I became friends, and that night changed my life about knowing that God, more than anything, he's real, he talks to you, and he can, and he will, if you will allow him to direct you and show you things. We just have to be willing to hear it. And that was probably the most willing time of my life at that moment. And so as I go on, you know me, I'm not, I ain't hiking up and down. I got bad knees, and the mountains are, treacherous. And, you went up one.
I did.
Yeah. Praise the Lord.
We went into El Plan. I think I broke a mule on the way into El Plan. And even what you're talking about with the orange shirt and red backpack changed the direction our church does, because we got involved in Honduras because of your passion for Honduras. And I remember I got hired here March 1st, and we left, I think, March 10th to go to Honduras. Like, I was here 10 days before we got on that plane to go, and people had dropped out of the trip because it was too dangerous. And we're like, the Lord's got us. We got this. And going into those places and El Plan. And I had to ask you a question. How mad at us were you when we hiked to El Rocco?
Well,
because you were very protective of us, and Jonathan and I and Brandon and Tara just kind of took off to another village, and there's no cell service up there.
There's nothing.
And we were like,
there's no light.
No light.
No electricity.
Had a headlamp and nothing. And I remember it rained that night.
It was raining.
We came back like a muddy mess. I'd fallen down like 20 times on that trip. I remember, we're going to get the wrath of Perucca when we get back.
I think, it is my nature now through God. I knew that there were these things that were communicated to me when I come into that country, and there were things that I'd already witnessed and seen through Rick Beck, who's crazy. There, he lived there, but I was like, dude, what are we doing in this place? But it was just natural that I want to protect. My deal was like, I'd always say to anybody as they went and their parents asked me questions, I said, I will not come back without them.
Right.
If they don't come back, I won't be back. I'll do everything I can to get them back. And seeing y'all go and do, but I realized a couple of things. Yeah, I was like, you shouldn't go. I was nervous, mainly, to be honest, for Jonathan and Brandon. I wasn't as nervous for you, and I knew that you were going to take care of Tara.
Yeah.
I was a little nervous for her, but she's tough. She's in better shape than all of y'all.
Yeah, she is, for sure.
So I wasn't as, but I think I learned a little something. Jonathan said, the Lord's in control of everything, and I realized he is in control of it. Doesn't mean that, he's still not in control if you spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair.
Right.
So all of those things. And so I knew, and when you got back, I would say I had some anxiety inside when y'all took off, because I was, truly worried for y'all, because I loved y'all.
Yeah, and it was such an unknown for us at that point, where we knew Hector, we knew Israel, we knew a few people,
right?
But we just didn't know what the mountains were like. But now I think when we go back, is how beautiful our connections are there, and how many friends and people. It was Daniel.
It was so important. You look at it now; it was so important. And Jonathan, I think, knew that, or God allowed Jonathan's ego we can do it, to be used, because that connection with El Rocco, where y'all,
and Edwin and
all of them, was
it's been beautiful.
It is.
We built a church there.
Over time, you see how God's connection.
Yeah, and Edwin is such a sweet, man of God. Has been so faithful to the ministry from that day on. I remember preaching. You go there and you experience things like, I think Tara was the first white woman ever in this village, and they were scared of us. For one, we're giants in Honduras. Okay, we get there, and there, Jacinto, 4'9" of him, grown man, 4'9". If he is. And we're hiking through there, and I remember the mud was fresh because they wanted to make it nice for us, but it was just a mud floor. There's like 5 chairs, and you sank down in the mud when you sit in them. But they were thatch roof. There's mice running around the roof, but there was raining, and the entire village comes out to hear.
Yeah.
Everybody comes out to hear the word of God, and God did something incredible through that and through the mountains and all the work that you've done. I think about Daniel and just, La Speranza and just so many friends that we have there that we truly would say aren't just like contacts, and they're friends and people that we would love to have here.
They're like family, yeah.
They're like family, he and Rixie, and just so many beautiful things that God has taken, let happen because of that passion to go in and to experience and really love those people.
I'd say that Wednesday night when I saw that vision, it changed my life. I remember coming back and I was no longer going back in for the right reason, but God knew what he was doing. He was using Hector. I was going back to see my friend and my brother in Christ because I told him I would be back, and I saw that I'd be back. And the guy told me, said, Eric, you need to be careful about telling him you'll come back and I looked at him and said, no, I'll be back, guaranteed. God showed me I'll be back. And I remember the next time I came back in, I always thought, I'm not, he had me walking in there, and I was like, I can't walk in there. There's no way I can walk in there. I remember we drive all the way up, and we're supposed to have all these mules and stuff waiting on us to pack our stuff in. And we get there, and there's like a handful of mules. And I'm like, where are they at? And they're like, well, a lot of them are using them, and we couldn't get them. And so this is what we had. And I was just like, oh, no. And so we were taking turns on a mule going up and down. I remember just the switchbacks that we were going through and everything. And I remember walking down, coming in, and El Plum has these two poles with a piece of wire that goes across the top of it. And it had a sign, and it says El Plum. And that was when you were entering into El Plum, which is just like a jungle. It's not, there's nothing but
there's no city square.
You hear the river, you hear the waterfalls, you hear that what's in El Plum. And I remember walking and seeing that and said, welcome to El Plum. And I looked down, and I had this bright orange shirt on from FCA that we had at camp, the year before, and a red backpack that I had. And I fell on my knees, and I just said, thank you, Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And I've spent 16 years, whatever it is, 15 years, doing missions in Honduras with them, and baptized Hector and his family. Jonathan and I got to do it in that extremely frigid spring that was there, and baptized lots of people. And it's just amazing to see where God took me, and he took Hector out of my life. Mm-hmm. He used Hector to get me back to Honduras. And then as I went back into Honduras and realized this was God's calling, that Hector left, and I kept going back there trying to reconnect with him, trying to see him. And the next time I saw him, I baptized him. And I realized it wasn't about Hector. And, we've been going in and doing what we're doing. And with the goodness of everything that's happened, the connection of this church and some of the greatest things that happened there, building this church, the guy that's poured the concrete for us, my best friend now, Brian Alvey, he, he didn't have Jesus in his life. He's this guy that was scattered everywhere, but he was a good concrete guy.
Yeah.
And so I was using him, and we had conversations, and I'd ministered to him, and he was dealing with drugs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff. And I remember one day after I got off work here, got back to the house, and he called me, and he said, "Can I talk to you?" And I was like, yeah, you can talk to me. What's up? And so I remember walking out into my garage and having a conversation with him, and he was like, I know you're a praying man. And the first thing that came to my mind is, oh man, tell me you're not going to walk out on me on my concrete. We need you.
Yeah.
And he said, so I have these friends of mine that are missionaries, and they have this mission called Signs of Love. And they teach deaf children sign language through the Bible, because where they're at, there's no value for them because they can't hear. So they just kind of throw these kids out, and they've created this ministry for it. And they've been pushing me to come do some concrete work and build some footbridges and things like that on their compound. And so I'm going to go, and I know that you're a praying man, and I don't know anything about missions, but I really feel like God's calling me to do this. And I was wondering if you'd pray for me. And I was like, man, I'll totally pray for you. And I was like, where are you going? And he said, Honduras. And I go, who are you going with? And he said, nobody, by myself. He said, I'm flying into San Pedro Sula, renting a truck and driving to La Ceiba. And I remember I said, you're going to die.
You're going to die.
You're going to die. And he goes, what? And I said, you're going to die.
You take the wrong turn in Honduras and you're in the
by yourself, you're done. And so he's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, I don't know if you've known this, but I've been going into Honduras for, I don't remember how long it was then, but it was like 9 years, 5 years, 6 years, something, I can't remember. But I said, I've been going into Honduras, and it's the most dangerous country in the world. And if you go by yourself and you're going to drive like that and you don't know what to do, you're going to die. You're going to end up there. You're going to die.
Someone will rob you.
I mean, it's corrupt. Everywhere you go, it's all corrupt. And so I said, but you let me know when you're going to go. I'll get my people there and they'll get you to La Ceiba. And he's like, okay. And so we started this dialogue. We started this relationship via him going to Honduras to do this. And his life was still scattered. Him and his wife had struggled with some stuff and, almost divorced. And his business partner had stole $1 million from his business, and he was in the hole for $1 million trying to dig his way out. I mean, he had a lot of demons, a lot of things in his life. And so I was happy to help him do this, and hopefully something would come out of it. And he gets there, and right before he gets there, he's going and he's communicated with them. I'll get to La Ceiba and I'll come. And they're like, okay. Well, before he gets there, about a week before he gets there, the guy that ran that Signs of Love got into a car wreck and he died. And the guy that he wrecked into also died. And like I said, everything's corrupt. Somebody's always connected to the cartel in some way. And that was somebody's in the cartel's, brother, son, or something. I don't know which it was. And the day they were taking his body back to the airport to flying back to California, someone assassinated his driver. It was planned and assassinated him. And so they shut down the whole compound. Nobody could come in or go out. And so Brian shows up and goes to the compound, and they're like, they won't let you in because nobody knows what the connection is or with who or what, and nobody can come in. And so Brian goes back to this hotel that he's staying at for the next, 6 or 7 nights. And he's staying there. Well, he has to park the vehicle. So Israel's with him. And Israel's my number one guy there in Honduras at the time. And he's got to go back, but he's going to leave Brian there at the hotel. And when he goes back, Israel's going to come back with him. Well, Brian just kind of gets up every day. Well, he had to park his truck. Well, they have these guys that sit outside, you pay them and they guard your truck.
Via Nudia, right?
Yeah. No, this one was in La Ceiba.
Okay.
And this kid worked in this hotel, and he gave him money to watch his truck. And every morning he'd go down and eat breakfast. And this kid would be in there, and he'd invite him over, and he'd feed him and talk to him. And they built this relationship and kind of talk. And he'd send him out to do errands for him, and he'd come back and everything. And anyway, he was calling me. He's like, I can't even go in. I don't even know why I'm here. It's just, anyway, the end of the trip happens. He leaves. He flies back. I go pick him up. And he was telling me, he's like, Eric, I didn't do anything. He goes, I don't know why God put this on my heart to go over there and do this. I didn't get to do anything that I was going to do. And he goes, but I met this guy, this kid, Daniel. He's an amazing kid. Built a relationship with him. Man, I wish I could bring that kid back to the States. I love that kid and all that. And I looked at him, I said, that's why you were there, Daniel. And he's like, nah, man, that ain't why I was there. And I said, yeah, Daniel. And he's like, really? You think it's Daniel? I said, that's the only thing that came out of it. If God sent you there and Daniel is the connection that you made and nothing else, then Daniel's the reason.
Yeah.
And so he didn't really get to experience what missions was really about, even though he did.
Until later.
And so I said to him, I said, well, here's the deal, man. I said, why don't you go with us? And you can see what we do. You can see how we do it. Then you'll have an understanding. So the next trip I have coming up is, here. And I said, why don't you go with us? And he said, okay, I'm going to go. So he got Daniel's number and they were talking, and all of a sudden he's like, man, if I'm going to go, I really want to see this kid. And I said, well, here's how you do it. And it was in twofold. I knew that he could pressure Daniel to go there, and then he would feel like that's the reason that he was supposed to be there. But I told him, I said, I want you to invite Daniel to come with us, but don't tell him he doesn't have to. And I want you to send him, we sent him quite a bit of money, $1,000, and said, I want you to take this money. You can do with it whatever you want. But if you want to see what we do, I would like you to use it to get yourself these things. And then I want you to meet us at the airport in San Pedro Sula on this day and come up to the mountains with us. But if you don't do it, keep this money, man. Bless your family. I love you, but no pressure. And he's like, are you sure, man? I'm like, you got to do it that way. It has to be Daniel's decision. You have to see that it's Daniel's decision and you don't influence it in any way. Mm. And sure enough, we go back and remember getting out. Brian got through the security check.
Yeah.
There first. And I remember he was out there and Israel was there and he knew Israel before. And so I finally got out there and he's come back and he's like, yeah, man, I don't see him. I don't think he's coming. And I'm like, just, hold on. We'll wait. We'll see. And he was talking to me and you could just feel the disappointment in his voice. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden he goes, oh, there he is. And he turns and there's Daniel walking up. And it was the most, I would say, probably the biggest thing that impact Brian's life is to see that kid there. And then he got in the truck with us and he was a negotiator. He negotiated us buying part of the coffee plantation and spent that time with us. And I remember walking through those mountains right there. We were sitting really close to where the bodega is, mm-hmm. where we process the coffee and everything. We were sitting on the mountain coming up. It's so hard to, and they're making fun of, me because I'm fat and I can't get up the hill. But, and I remember sitting down and he looked at me, Daniel looked at me and goes, why do you do this? And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, why do you come here? Why do you do this? And I said, well, Daniel, let me tell you, when I was 27 years old, I was lost and I was a prisoner in captivity, and Jesus opened my eyes and revealed himself to me, and I'm no longer a slave, and I was saved, mm-hmm. and now I'm no longer a captive, and I want everybody to understand who Jesus is and know what it is to be free and to have eternal life with him. And so I come here because I love them, just like he loved me, and we want to tell them the gospel. We want to tell them about Jesus Christ and what he's done for me and what he can do for them. And he didn't get it. Yeah. Daniel didn't get it. He's like, but you don't take anything. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not here to take, I'm here to give. Mm-hmm. I will never leave this place less, but only more than when I came here. When I leave, it won't be less. And so he kind of, I could see it really tweaking his brain, and Brian came over and started talking to him. Brian was fresh in it. He was listening a lot to it. And we get back to the airport and, Daniel, he starts crying. I mean, he's weeping, and he's an orphan. Yeah. Daniel grew up as an orphan on in the island of Roatan, in an orphanage there, and it was a British house. So they learned English and Spanish. And so he speaks fluent English, just like you and me. Sounds like us, a little bit of an accent sometimes, but all in all, you wouldn't be able to tell. And so here he is crying, has no family. The family that he does have is, he has very little bit of a relationship. Pilo's the only one that he really has a relationship with, his cousin. And he was crying and crying. And he goes, I feel like my family's leaving. And I said, Daniel, the good news is of us leaving is that we'll be back. Mm-hmm. We'll be back. And so we leave and we stay in touch with Daniel, obviously, and the next trip back, That's when Daniel reveals to us that he feels like God's calling him to run our coffee plantation. And so one of the crazy things is how I look at how God, Al Bazzacci always says God sews everything together with one thread. There's never a break. There's never a different thread. Everything that happens throughout, the entire universe is sewn together with one thread. Somehow you're connected to something, and he always makes it happen. And so I look at the concrete that's in this building, how God used it for me and Brian to meet, that Brian would contact me, not even knowing that I'm in, just all the parallel. Like Brian and I talk about all the time, we still can't believe how God brought us together, all the things that happened with Daniel. And now we look at Daniel and we look at what is happening in his life with his family and the coffee plantation and the ministry in the mountains and those kind of things. It's just, it's amazing. He comes to, Daniel comes to the pastor's training we do with Mauricio for Youth for Christ camp, gets baptized there.
Yeah.
And then back at Israel's house, Jonathan marries him.
Yep.
It's just amazing to see, how all that comes full circle and what God is doing and how he does it if we're just willing to go and do the things. And so I look back on my life and I can tell you this, there was a moment in my life where I never thought I would have a family. I never thought I would have kids, much less a career or have, any prospect of being able to take care of a family, a ministry, a mission. I never thought I would see, there's children with our names that live in Honduras. People have named their kids after us. None of that. What I saw was destruction, and none of it had anything to do with me, but had to do with him.
Yep. And God can redeem.
He picks you up and he takes you out of the mire and he makes you clean and he gives you a new vision. And he gives you, my prayer for the longest time, and I don't know what's going to happen. And I know this, mission never happens the way you think it's going to happen. And if you can learn to go into a country and have some kind of agenda, but understand that God has an agenda and you want his agenda to be made, you'll be successful.
Yeah.
The moment you're trying to make something happen. And so for the longest time, I thought this ministry, this mission, I'm going to build it up. And when I die, my kids are going to take this over and it's going to, that isn't necessarily what God wants, but I still pray that that's what's going to happen. Somehow they're going to get involved. Do I see it? No, I don't know.
Right.
But you know what I mean? I never saw Daniel.
But God's children, it's God's children, right? You have spiritual children like Daniel, like, just all these, little Eric, right? Israel's son. And so you see God work his hand, like Al says, that one thread that goes through that Brian Alvey leads us to Daniel. And now, when this episode airs, our mission team will be coming back from Honduras.
Yeah.
And seeing Daniel and Rick C., who's an incredible cook, by the way.
And Israel's house.
Israel's house, and just all these incredible things that God started in West Texas, fighter, nearly imprisoned young man, but now God can redeem and make something beautiful out of it. Ashes into beauty is an incredible thing. And so thanks so much for coming today and sitting down with me. I've gotten to hear a lot of the story, although I learned some cool things about Ross and ended up in Great Hills. What an incredible story. But
he still lives here.
Yeah, that's amazing.
The cool thing about Ross was his daughter, which I didn't have a relationship with. Rebecca knew her, but really she was younger than us. Ross called and said, "Hey, my daughter's living out in that area. Could she come visit your path group or your group?" So she came. She's a lawyer, working in government here. She was dating this guy, and we were talking to her. They got engaged, got married, and we kind of talked her through that. And then we were able to do marriage counsel for Ross's daughter, and they're married, and they just had their first child. So even things like that, you're just like, I have no relationship, but God has a plan, not only for Ross in my life, but Ross's children somehow connected to my life.
You get to be a blessing to him like he was a blessing to you.
And we love her. You know, she's amazing. So is her husband. And
I think I met her one time at your path group when I came to visit.
Yes.
So Praise the Lord. That's so cool. Let me pray for you.
All right.
Thanks so much for sitting down with me,
Thank
Lord.
you.
Thank you so much for Eric and Rebecca and just their entire family for just the incredible way, Lord, you brought him to you. And Lord, just as a way that you only can as our sovereign God, Lord, and the ability, Lord, that you have to thread together these things, Lord, to where we have an incredible mission in Honduras because of the passion of Eric, Lord, and the connections of Brian Alvey to Daniel, Lord, and just the call and wisdom of Jonathan, and my chance to run into El Rocco, and just so many things, ways the Lord is, you've just done so many things, Lord, and we just give you all the praise and all the glory. So I pray a blessing over Eric and his family and their family dinners and the way that they connect to one another. And Lord, help us continue to serve you with an all-out abandoned worship of you. You are our God, and we worship you. We pray all this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, brother.
God is faithful.
He is all the time, man, in ways that we can't even imagine.
So it's crazy.